Welcome to the Kings Beat podcast. Like I told you, we'd bring in a second podcast this week, another guest. Today we have a very, very good guest. This is Eric Pincus from Bleacher Report and the Sports Business Classroom. If you haven't heard about Sports Business Classroom, it's absolutely spectacular. If you want to dive into being a front office person and want to get educated, they do incredible classes down in Las Vegas. And Eric, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to chopping it up. We'll talk some Kings and whatever else you want to talk. It's a wild time of year. This is probably the best time of year if you're an NBA fan, outside of actually the games and whatnot.
This is, you know what? Even for some of us, this is more fun than the games because the games drone on. This is like high level excitement. Who knows what's going to happen, where anything's going to go, what's a rumor and what's real. 98% of things are not real. But it's good to bring in a salary cap expert just before we get to the NBA draft, before we get to free agency starting on June 30th. Just does this year feel any different? Does the buzz feel different with the Kyrie stuff, the Bradley Beal stuff already heating up, the James Harden questions, OG Anunoby maybe going a different direction, like all of the things that are kind of building right now?
Well, I wouldn't say. I mean, what's different is that we have a new set of rules. So every roughly 7 years, we get a new collective bargaining agreement, and in those years, you get a certain amount of like flux where some teams understand what the rules mean, the impact that they'll have over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, it's a 7-year deal, but really, like, you care about, if you're a GM, the next 1 to 3 years, and yeah, of course, down the road. But you can only think so far, and it's a great opportunity for teams to make terrible mistakes or to profit off of other teams making terrible mistakes as well. So it's always a time of rebalancing, priority shifting. And I don't think teams fully understand yet how they're going to approach it. And I don't think they can know until they start talking, which they have, to other teams and start to negotiate and talk about trades. And, I think it's fun. I don't think it's any different than any other off season otherwise. I mean, the names are always different. Who's the guy available in trade? Every market before impacts the market now. So we had that crazy summer last year where Rudy Gobert went for a zillion picks and Donovan Mitchell went for a million picks, and it just felt like there's been this increasing escalation of what stars go for. And I feel like a correction is coming, but I don't know if we're there yet. And that's the question. I think that's what, if this summer's different, it's going to be because there's a correction where teams don't do what they did last summer, or they double down and just do it even more.
It's like, it always feels like they double down though, doesn't it? Like we always get to a point where like, well, this can't happen again. And then, like someone finds a way to pay Jim McElvain too much money. And you're like, why do we do this? Why do we do this?
Right. So that's an old school throwback salary cap callback that led to, like, what was it? Gary Payton? Was it Sean Kemp? Wasn't that Seattle?
Yes.
McElvain. So I think that led to, like, Sean Kemp being unhappy because McElvain was getting more than him, or some. This is like even before my time of salary cap awareness, and like,
yeah,
I don't even think I was working yet as a journalist. So that's a good mention there. I like that.
Yeah, it's the trickle down after the big mistakes that are made, and how do you get out of them? And it doesn't feel like the big mistakes are big mistakes anymore. Like even the Kings are, saddled with Rashawn Holmes's $25 million over the next 2 years, and like, this is the NBA. Getting rid of a 2-year, $12 million each year contract really isn't that difficult. You just got to package it in a bigger deal.
Well, if you go back 10, 20 years ago or 10 years ago, 12 million was a lot of money. Whereas relative to the cap, I mean, if the cap was half, right, and 12 million would be like, 24 million now. So it's, depending on how you look at it, if you go back to what it used to be, 12 million was a lot. Right. That was like near max.
Totally. Yeah. My first 2 years covering Sacramento Kings, 2010, 11, 11, 12, Kings had the lowest payroll and they're right at 58 million bucks. And they didn't get to 58 million until 1 year they traded for Troy. Daniels.
Troy Daniels?
No, it wasn't Troy Daniels. It was the one that had injured his neck for the Mavs and never played again. I don't think it was Troy Daniels. It'll come to me.
Okay.
And then the next year they traded for Sam Cassell to get to the floor.
There you go.
So those are those years where like and then we look now and teams are $200 million payrolls. It's crazy how the game has changed. So let's get to the new CBA. What is it about the new CBA that you would think that that the basic fan needs to know that's way different or that would be meaningful, especially in a Sacramento Kings conversation?
Well, I mean the general vibe of the CBA is to limit the unbridled spending that certain teams have done, specifically the Warriors and the Clippers, but it's a longer list. And I try to tell people, because some people say to me like, well, why are they punishing the owners that are willing to spend? Like if they have billionaire owners, why are they being punished, right? And that sounds great. Like yeah, on the surface, it's like, okay, yeah, sure. Ballmer's coming in. He's a great owner with a lot of money. He's building a new stadium, right? New arena, all that stuff. Putting all the huge front office, spare no expense. So why should he be punished? And so on the other end of that is that you have 20 something teams. Last season we had 9 teams under the tax. We had over the tax. We had 21 under. And like the Sixers got under and they could have been over, but like by and large 2/3 of the league is trying not to spend a certain amount, and it fluctuates. Like if you're a championship team, you should be in the tax. Like the Nuggets should be paying a lot of money for those particular players, whereas the Spurs, who are rebuilding pre-Wembanyama, shouldn't be spending as much, right? So like it's cyclical. It's not, but the main thing is like if you're sort of obligated to spend to the point where you're like the Bucks, where the Bucks paid to get Giannis, they paid to keep Middleton and Drew together, and spend on Lopez and spend. They've lost money, from what I've been told, last few years. I don't know the number, but let's say it's $100 million a year. I'm making that part up. Teams shouldn't be obligated based on market size to run at a loss for $100 million or whatever a year. And just because the Warriors are in San Francisco, which is a very expensive part of America, one of the most expensive places to live in America, and they can charge the exorbitant prices, and I don't belittle them. I mean, great, it's wonderful, and I live in LA. Lakers charge the prices they charge. Clippers charge a certain price, probably not even as high as the Lakers, but you have your Knicks and your whatever cities you want to claim. Milwaukee is not that. And so, Sacramento is not as big of a market as San Francisco. There's not quite as much capital. And so, like, if you're the NBA and you want investment companies to buy in to NBA teams, you want to attract great owners. The appeal is, obviously bragging, you own an NBA team. That's great. But if it's an investment, it's supposed to appreciate. And so you say, fine, well, it will. You let's say you buy it at $5 billion and sell it at $10 billion. But should you lose $100 million or more a year? Are you obligated to lose that? And then if you're an investor in the world, in a capital firm, and you're thinking investments, well, this is a good investment. We'll double our money, but we're going to shed, we're going to have to fork in $100 million every year. It's less attractive. So I think the goal is to get everybody on as equal a playing field as possible. So you're restricted if you're spending. We're going to freeze your draft picks if you're spending past a certain line, which we can get into later. We're going to make it so it's hard to trade, because that's how the Clippers have done it. Clippers didn't do it by draft, and they didn't do it by spending. They spent the year they spent on Kawhi. They traded into Paul George. Then they traded into like Norm Powell, and they traded into Robert Covington, and you start going down the list. And then they've also used the rights, early bird rights, to pay guys like Batum and Reggie Jackson, who's no longer with the team. Like, there are ways around the rules, and those ways still exist, but they're limited. They're punishing. So the overarching theme is to make sure that the Bucks or the Grizzlies or the Pelicans or the Kings or whatever have a chance to compete, and that you can't just buy a title. Now, I don't think you can buy a title. The closest we've come, arguably, is the Warriors, the most recent one. But even that, like, they drafted one of the best players of all time, right?
Yep.
Like, there was no buying Steph. It was, paying him a lot. But I'm saying like people saying, oh, teams should emulate what the Nuggets are doing. Yeah, sure. Draft one of the best centers of all time in the second round. Yes, absolutely. But like realistically, it's just not how it works. It happens, but it's lightning in a bottle. So I think that's the standout is this second apron that punishes teams. And we'll see teams maybe treat it like a hard cap. I think some teams absolutely will, but some teams wouldn't even go into the tax. So what do they care about it? Like the Pelicans weren't in the tax. So were they ever
Kings
going to
aren't
get
in
up?
the tax.
Yeah,
Yeah.
were they ever going to get up to the first or the second? The Kings haven't been a high spending outfit for some time, but they also haven't been a playoff team for some time. This is the first time in my three daughters, my youngest daughter's lifetime, and she's a junior now in high school, that they've made the playoffs like in her entire life. And I came up covering the Lakers and the Kings in that heyday. That was wonderful.
Oh yeah.
I even went before I had kids with my wife, and we went to the Kobe food poisoning game. Like we flew up from LA. It was a blast. We just wanted to have some fun. We didn't have kids yet, so we could just get up and jump on a plane and no well, we had responsibilities, but not like we do now, but it's all good. So yeah, there's changes coming. There's changes that are there that are purposefully designed to try to change how things work. Now we have to see how that impact actually filters into practice.
Yeah, I think that's always going to be the biggest question. How does it impact? And not only that, but like we're looking at a new television deal, and that's going to change the numbers dramatically. As of right now, we have some pretty steep inclines and what the salary cap will be. What 34 million this year, like 40 next, 140 next, 147 the year after that. And so we're like hedging towards like the salary cap being right at 150 million. And then it could jump by a substantial amount if the new television deal comes in.
Right. Within limits.
Yeah, within.
They did legislate cap smoothing, which
Oh, that's good.
limits
Yeah.
the growth to 10%.
Okay.
So it will never grow 10%, more than 10% year to year. So let's say that there's making up numbers, 10 billion worth of income, and now it's 15 billion.
Mm-hmm.
The cap is not going to jump that much. It's going to jump 10%, and the players are going to get their money, but they're going to get it back. Essentially, the NBA
impound, right?
pay the NBPA, the union, and that money would come back to the players. So, the cap is 134 projected. Conservatively, it's 5% the next year at 141-ish. Conservatively, it's also 5% up, 147, but maybe aggressively it'll be 10%. So it could jump by 25, 26 to maybe the 150 range. So right now we're at about 147 projection. It could jump a little higher, 151 or something like that. So we'll have to wait and see that we won't know. We won't know that for some time. We'll at least have a sense of where things are going for next season on June 30th. They usually give out the projection for the next season. So hopefully we'll get it'll be, right now, if it's 141, then we're on track, which is about 5%.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I mean, it's kind of how you have to build a team now. You got to plan everything out in advance. You got to be aggressive, but also keep in mind the bigger picture. Like this summer, the Kings have to be extremely conservative, knowing that, well, they don't have to be extremely conservative, but they can't do something silly that ties up so much money going forward because they have Sabonis next year as an unrestricted free agent. They also have Malik Monk, who would be, an early bird exception at best. So they're going to have to pay other players, some of their own players as we go forward. When you look at this summer, how many teams do have cap space, like meaningful cap space that they can go out and actually make some legitimate changes, especially with maybe some of the restricted free agents that are going to be available that we could actually see someone actually get chased a little bit.
Right. Well, there are probably 7-ish range. I mean, we don't know yet. Like, does like Kristaps Porzingis opt in? Does he opt out?
Yeah.
You have to go through certain steps. We don't know where Philadelphia is going to be. Does James Harden leave? Does he stay? That changes their equation a little bit. But with what we know, you have roughly 7 teams. So Detroit, Houston, Indiana, Oklahoma City, excuse me, Orlando, San Antonio, and Utah. And those numbers are going to fluctuate. Like Utah's going to be based on, do they keep Clarkson? Does Taylor Horton Tucker opt in? San Antonio can fluctuate a little bit by Zach Collins, but they're in like the $30 to $40 million range. These are rough numbers. Orlando, they have to make a decision on Jonathan Isaac because they can stretch his number out or trade him. So they could have anywhere between 20-ish to 40-ish. Oklahoma City is in the 35 kind of range. Indiana about 27. Houston about 62. So they're the big spender, which is why I think Harden is a semi-realistic possibility there. And Detroit's about 30. So, if you look at the teams I mentioned, Detroit would like to make the playoffs. They've been clear about that last year or two. Especially last year at the deadline when teams were asking them about Bogdanovic. One of their answers was, we think we're a playoff team next year. We need a shooting. Doesn't mean they are, but they operate out of what they think they are, right? So I don't think that, I think their space is probably spent to improve. But Houston, if Harden comes, it could be also, so like I think Houston and Detroit are spending to make the playoffs and to be successful. But Houston's very iffy how that happens because it could be Chris Paul, it could be Fred VanVleet, it could be Grant Williams, it could be any number of players and more than one. There could be sign-in trades, a lot of possibilities. Houston has probably out of anybody outside of Oklahoma City with all their picks. Houston probably has the most flexibility. San Antonio has the most, arguably also, well, they may have more picks. I'd have to look at it. It's a close situation. And then Utah has also a lot of flexibility. They would like to make the playoffs, but they're not going to hurt themselves to make the playoffs. OKC wants to make the playoffs. Indiana wants to make the playoffs. So, and even San Antonio, they need to give Wembanyama presumptively a team that can help him grow. So you don't want it to be what it's been. So each one of these teams, it's not like I don't think they're spending on outside of Houston. I don't think they're going after like over 30 veterans. I think they're going after guys who can grow with them. Like Utah's young, San Antonio's young, Orlando's young, OKC's young, Indiana's young, Houston, whatever, and Detroit is young. So it's a combination of spending more on players that fit their timeline, or in the absence of that, giving older players a lot of money, but on short deals. So because you have to get to the minimum team salary, the floor. So you might see San Antonio pay a player. I'm not saying they get Fred VanVleet, but instead of like, let's say a team is offering Fred VanVleet 25 over, 3 years, 75. They could maybe offer 40 for one. I'm not saying they would do that. I'm just making up stuff. Or 35 for one. It's probably a bad example, and I'd have to look at the numbers, but just to kind of give a sense of they could overpay a veteran. You do have after those teams, those 7 teams, now you get into everybody else, which is roughly, projected 12.2 million of the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. And these are teams that there's a limit to what they can spend, because if you start to get into these aprons, you get a hard cap. Charlotte, Chicago, Cleveland, Memphis, Minnesota, New York, New Orleans, Portland, Toronto, Washington, and of course Sacramento are in that range. So they have the spending power to add probably one key player or multiple $6 million guys, $6.5 million. Anything above that, you get into teams that maybe they have 5 million, maybe they don't even have that. And that's the rest of anyone we didn't mention has either 5 million or less. And so if you're worried about losing your guy for 12 million, it's not going to be with Boston. It's not going to be with even Atlanta or Milwaukee, Miami. These teams don't project to have more than 5 million. It could change via trade, but of right now, where they are, barring trade, that's where they are.
So when you look at the Kings, and they are a MLE team, they're right at that 12.2, but they can clear space. Is there any advantage right now to them becoming a true cap team? Because I mean, look, they've got the cap hold of Harrison Barnes like 27.5. They've got, whether it's Alex Len or Chimezie Metu or Terrence Davis, Trey Lyles, they have free agents, but they have the ability to wipe out so much of that. I think a lot of people get confused and saying, oh, they could get up to $23 million in cap space, but then like I know that they no longer have their mid-level, they no longer
Right,
have their
right.
biannual and all that stuff. So what would be the advantage if you're the Kings? And is there a reason to do that? I guess if you were chasing some huge like restricted free agent, but even 23 million for
Right.
a lot of teams might not be enough.
I would say, like, terminology wise, I generally refer to teams under the cap as room teams, and then the teams that are above the room, above room that don't have room that are under the tax as cap teams. That
Yep.
again, everyone uses different terminology. But if we use the terminology of there are teams that are above the cap, which is where the Kings are theoretically, below the tax, they're a cap team, and then we have our tax teams, we have our apron teams, now we have our second apron teams. If we were talking about Jim McElvain and stuff, like, you go back far enough, you could just say NTML, or you could say MLE, because there was one. Right now there's three. There's room mid level, there's taxpayer mid level. The rules, it's good for business, I gotta say. I'm not
Yeah.
mad at like things getting more complicated. The more complicated the better. I mean, it's great for job security. I mean, knock on wood, I don't want to say anything crazy, but I have the Kings as as quote a cap team above the cap, and to get to a room team, let's say that they're max. So I have their max, and it's not insignificant. I have them in the neighborhood of 22 million, and that would be Fox, Sabonis, Herter, Holmes, Malik, Keegan, Davian Mitchell, and the number 24 pick. The rest are roster charges, 4 roster charges at the minimum.
Yep.
$134 million cap, 22.1 million. So to get that, you're renouncing the rights to Harrison. You're renouncing the rights to Terrence Davis, Alex Lynn, Trey Lyles, Metu, and Dellavedova. Maybe some. Technically, the Kings, last I checked, have the rights to Corey Brewer, by the way, still. So just
They
a little.
do.
Yeah.
They do.
But
And
that's
Jeremy Lin. Jeremy Lamb.
No, I think Lamb came off, but
Okay.
I'll have to double check that. I mean,
Okay.
my records are usually pretty good, and I don't think I have Lamb on there anymore. But maybe I missed it. So what you lose is you lose the mid level, which is 12.2, and you lose the biannual, which is 4.5 or 4.4, but we'll call it 4.5. So you're losing about $16.7 million that you can spend to gain 22 million, right? So you're gaining 5-6 million. Let's call it 6. Let's just round numbers, make it really easy.
Yeah.
You're gaining 6 million, let's say. In gaining 6 million, you're losing Harrison Barnes, and you're losing Terrence Davis, Len, Lyles, whatever. If I were to pencil in who I think is valuable to the Kings that they bring back, it would probably be Barnes. And some fans may be like, oh, maybe he's the least productive starter. I don't know. And I don't want him on my team because fans get kind of like, he was a valuable part of a playoff rotation. He's a good vet, low maintenance. And the kind of investment they should make into him should reflect his age, which is around 30. And maybe paying him $30 million a year is a mistake, but finding him at the right number is probably, you're probably not going to get a better player at 22 minus what you also lose in the mid-level. Like, could you get 3 players, right? Harrison Barnes, a $12 million player, and a $4.5 million player, right?
Yep.
Are those 3 players better than a single $22 million player? It depends on the player, right? Kyle Kuzma's out there. Would he come for 22? Probably not. He would fit positionally.
Yep.
I think he expects more money than that. So now you're like, well, we've decided Kyle Kuzma's the guy. We are happy replacing Harrison Barnes. They would gain, and this is where the comparison doesn't necessarily hold up as much anymore. You gain the room exception if you go under the cap. So you do gain, and that used to be a small number, but now it's a big number. So it's 7.6. So if they did drop under, they would have 22 and 7.6. So now you start to say, well, I mean, we just broke it down. Like, it doesn't make sense. 22, unless it's a really good player. I'd rather have 3 players, including Barnes.
Yep.
Or maybe it's 122 player and 176, and you lose Barnes. Now you're just losing that $4.5 million player. Assuming you can get the same quality of player at 12 that you can get at 7.6. Like, you start to run into combinations, and the thing is, Trey Lyles' number, because he was the minimum, is pretty low. His cap hold is about $2 million. So maybe you drop down to $20 million and you can pay him more via his rights. It's early bird rights,
Early
which should be
birds.
enough.
Yep.
So let's say that you pay Lyles. So you're able to keep Lyles. You have 20 million now. So I don't want to say there's a singular path for the Kings, because the most obvious, straightforward path: pay Harrison Barnes, find a good player for 12 million, like they found Monk last year, and move forward with that. Pay Lyles. Then you decide on Terrence Davis. Does he, is he a valued part of what you're doing? I know he's done some good things. I don't know if he's part of the future or not. That may depend on 24. That may depend on other offers he might get. May depend on other things. Same, backup center Len. I'm sure you could find, Medu. All these are decisions that need to be made. The bigger one, if there's a trade, there's always the possibility of either trading away salary to increase that cap space. You mentioned Holmes, and I don't know if there's a market for him. 24 million. He has a player option. It's about 25 almost, right?
Yeah.
Over 2 years. If you pulled off 12 million, it doesn't quite give you that exact number in cap space, but it would give you close to that. And if we plug him in, you get to 33. And if we put in Lyles cap hold,
I think
it's
it's
still
3.4.
Yeah, so it's a 2 million cap hold for Lyles, because it's just the minimum, because he was a minimum contract previously. So you don't use the formulas that you use to figure out a cap hold go out the window when it's a minimum. It's just the minimum.
Okay.
So they could get to 32 million in cap space if for instance, the Spurs or those teams we talked about, the Pistons have like 4 centers. Probably not a good approach. But you find a team that would take Rashawn Holmes, and now you're at 32. And now let's say Kyle Kuzma was the guy. I'm not saying he is. Positionally, he fits where he could be that 4 next to, or that 3, and you could play Keegan, and you could whatever. They could certainly figure out how they want to play. Does he solve your defensive issues, or are you doubling down in let's just be even more of what we were? Yeah, that's what you're doing in this theory. Maybe you're better off going after Jeremy Grant because he's a better defender, but he's also someone who's kind of fallen in love with scoring in recent years and is over 30. So, you start, and I also think he's going back to Portland. But I don't like to write in anything in ink until it happens. So, if you're the front office of the Kings, you're looking at, in talking to agents, probably illegally at this time, which, is standard. You're talking to agents and sort of mapping out, like, what's the interest, is Kuzma opting out? Again, I'm making that name up. I don't know that the Kings want Kuzma. What are the needs? And, if you're saying Sabonis is the center and Fox is the guard at point, and you're going to be playing, Kevin and Keegan major minutes, and you want Malik as your guy off the bench, it kind of reduces your minutes that are available for free agent, right? Like, it kind of makes it clear, like a Harrison Barnes replacement or Harrison Barnes. And then if Mitchell is your point guard off the bench, you're pretty well set at the guard positions. Herter has a little bit of playmaking skill. So does Monk, probably secondary playmakers, not primary. So, and Murray probably needs to play a ton of minutes. So, making sure there's a defensive option when Sabonis is either off the court, or is there making up, is there a Daniel Gafford type, right? Like a springy, athletic, shot blocking guy who isn't asked to score much outside of dunking and just being, a younger JaVale McGee, right?
Yeah,
like,
totally.
I'm not saying that's what they should do. I'm just saying, looking at their roster, if Rashawn Holmes is not that, which in Mike Brown's rotation doesn't seem to be, that's where you're probably looking. So, the question then becomes, is there a trade market for Rashawn, or is there a trade market where one of the names that we've mentioned is less of a foundational piece than what you and I are talking about, right? Like, we didn't expect, I don't think anyone expected them to trade Tyrese Halliburton, right?
Yep.
So it's easy to sort of ink in, this is the team, Fox, Herter, Keegan Murray, Sabonis, Malik Monk, Davion Mitchell, and either Harrison Barnes or replacement. But maybe there's an opportunity to trade Keegan Murray, not to say that would happen, and you're bringing in, Luka Doncic, or you're bringing in Giannis, or you're not going to, I'm not saying, please don't be aggregating some nonsense like that if you're watching this. I'm just saying, you don't know if you're a team where some teams we've got to make this change. We've got to we're going in a totally different direction, and we need to dump this, and they can't find something better. And the Kings do have a certain amount of flexibility. They're not on the A tier of draft capital when it comes to, they don't have any other team's first round picks. They only have their own. They owe one to Atlanta for 2024, but there are protections that Stepien restrict, which basically means they can't trade free and clear any picks until 28. So they could trade 28 and 30, or there are ways where you could do, you trade with Atlanta, you unprotect 24, and that could free up 26. So in theory, they could trade 3 firsts and probably some seconds to get to have that 3rd first. But even that is not going to compare necessarily with the Knicks, who have just, 4 firsts in next year's draft. I mean, some are protected, let alone they have another pick. And then the Pelicans have a bunch, and the Rockets and the Jazz and the Spurs and the Thunder and maybe one other team. I have a list of all that. So, but that doesn't mean that they're not part of a big deal. It just means that it's got to make sense. And do their 2 firsts, if that's what they're offering, beat out, 2 firsts, Rashawn Holmes and whatever? Does that beat out what the Knicks could offer? And are the Knicks offering that? Because it's not theoretical. When we get to, it's theoretical leading up to the trade deadline. It's theoretical leading up to the draft and free agency. When you're actually there, the teams have to operate within what is actually being offered, not what, on paper, what should be offered or what is fair value. It's the actual value that you're facing. And that the Kings know, and they probably don't even know themselves yet, right? Because if they're talking to other teams, have other teams revealed all the cards they're willing to play on June, if we're recording this on June 15th and the draft is on June 22nd,
things will change.
Yes. They don't, no team knows, right? Like when you trigger a deal, right? Because you've now, okay, this is what we believe is the last thing, that this is the best that we're going to get. We're not going to get better. And we believe that. And it's rare. Usually there's a deal or two between Monday through Wednesday, day of the draft, 1 or 2 deals pre-draft, maybe 3. And then on draft day, there's a ton. And then there's also a bunch that are agreed to that don't trigger until July 6th after the moratorium in the new salary cap year.
Yeah, that's a lot. So there's all kinds of things that could happen. And I think that's the interesting thing about where the Kings are at in their position. They do have an opportunity to become a room team. They do have an opportunity, if they can, give up a couple of seconds to get someone to take Rashawn Holmes, or maybe even give up the 24th pick. They have that option you talked about where they can go and negotiate with Atlanta and try to get the pick protections taken off so they have more access to their picks. I guess that's a good question. Like, what does that entail? If the Kings, so their 2024 is protected 1 through 14. In 2025, it's 1 through 12. In 2026, it's 1 through 10. If it doesn't relay by 2026, it becomes 2 seconds, which are the 2026 and 2027. So they can't trade the 2027 either. They can only trade the 2028. But what would it take for them to go in and, like, legality wise with the league, to have it like, okay, look, the Kings believe they're a playoff team next year. Let's just pull the cap. I mean, the 1 through 14 off of it.
Right. Well, it's pretty straightforward. It's just it's like literally another trade. And it goes through a trade call, and there all the normal steps. We're trading whatever, like 24 to it's just making stuff up. We're trading the 24 pick to the Hawks in exchange for we're trading the number 24. I don't mean the year. I mean actual number 24 in this draft for the 24 pick. And we're getting it back, right? That's one way of doing it. Like, you're giving them a pick, they're taking it. And I'm again making stuff up. And now that pick is completely off the books as far as obligation. And so now the Kings have no picks that they owe. They can trade 24 after the draft. They can trade 24, 26, 28 and 30. So now you have 4 firsts that you can offer. So let's say that there was some, megastar, whatever, Jokic, because we'll just go with ridiculous. He's the MVP. The Nuggets are like, all right, we don't want him anymore. We're sending him to the Kings, and we just want 4 firsts. And the Kings trade 24 to the Hawks, get those picks. So that's a ridiculous example, but to show the mechanics. It could be something as simple as, here's we'll give you, because the way that the trade works is that it's 24 with protections that eventually convert, if the protections are met, convert to 26 and 27 seconds, right?
Okay.
If the Kings called up the Hawks and said, we'll give you 24 unprotected and we'll give you 26 and 27, I mean, if you're the Hawks, it's like, sure.
Oh, the second rounders. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you're getting, but the thing is like removing the protection is an advantage to the Hawks, right? Because like, let's say that the Kings next year suddenly backslide and end up 9 in the draft and win the lottery, right? So if you're the Hawks, like, maybe you want that, maybe you don't. I have no idea. And, I don't know if I were the Kings that I would do that, but I'm just saying those are the kind of pathways that exist.
Okay.
You can actually trade 26 with language that is, functionally like 2 years after the prior obligation. So they owe, right. So you owe 24. So we're going to trade you 26. But if the obligation to Atlanta is in 25, now we owe you 27. And if it's 26, then so there, it doesn't necessarily increase the number of picks, but it theoretically could. You could trade 3, 26, 28, and 30. But the problem is 26 has to be 2 years after. Then does that make 28 2 years after 29? So 28 becomes 29. Now 2030 is not available. So 2030 comes off. And so there would have to be trade language by which, these picks are both 2 years after. And if 2030 doesn't convey, then you get the 2030 second and $5 million. I don't know. Like there's, all kinds of ways that you can incentivize. I will throw out one more point to our earlier topic. I ran the number just, while we were talking on what if they stretched out Richaun Holmes. He's owed 2 years and he's owed in the neighborhood of 25. So it's roughly $5 million over 5 years. Mm-hmm. So let's say that they canvass the league and the price to trade Richaun Holmes is too high. And let's say that, this is including keeping Lyles at his cap hold, but losing Harrison Barnes and whatever, everyone else. That would be about 27-ish million in cap space.
Okay.
So it's kind of split in the difference. So trading Richaun Holmes could, for nothing back in terms of salary, could get you to about 32. They could get to about 22. They can get about halfway to 20, to 27. And you wouldn't do that blindly. You wouldn't do that. Oh, okay, let's get to 27. It would be like you have a deal.
You got a deal. Yeah.
For somebody at 27. And therefore you're making these moves to do so. So that's where, like, if you're just making up stuff and saying, hey, they should do that, they should do this. Well, they should only do that if there's already a yes. Everything kind of stems on a yes. Now, those yeses might be trade or they may be free agent related. And of course, on June 15th, you shouldn't have any, or June 30th, even. I don't know. I guess June 30th, you can, depending on the time of day, you can start to get agreements. But before then, you're not supposed to. I think that the rule changes next year where you can negotiate with your own guys. So in theory, at this time, they could be negotiating with Harrison Barnes. And actually, I think they can announce that they've reached a deal, but I don't know. The rules aren't even written in final version yet. So we don't know exactly how that's going to manifest.
Okay. Question on Sasha Vezenkov. Kings have been chasing him for the last 2 summers. Like everything I'm hearing is it looks really positive. There's a very good chance that they will be able to bring over Vezenkov this summer, former second-round pick, but a guy that they're going to have to pay. He's stacking up EuroLeague MVPs left and right. He's playing in the Greek League finals right now, and he looks like he's a player. Who knows if he's a rotational piece or not, but the Kings believe that he is. But how complicated does that get? And I've heard like last season they tried to carve out 1.64 league minimum contract out of their mid-level exception, which is why, of course, Malik Monk was paid less than the full mid. But they carved that out with the hopes that they would be able to bring in Sasha Vezenkov on a longer than a 2-year contract. It didn't work out, but then here we are again this offseason where it does look like there's a good chance that they will bring him over. So what is the mechanisms in play here with a foreign player, a former second round pick, 5 years later, or whatever it is, and how can they bring him over?
So one of the new rules is the creation of a new exception so that you don't have to peel off part of your mid-level anymore. So it's called what they're calling the second round pick exception. So that would apply in this case, and he would be eligible to sign 2 different structures. One would be a 3-year contract, and one would be a 4-year contract. But the challenge maybe is that it's higher than the minimum, but it's the minimum. It's just it's a different year of service minimum, so it's not the rookie minimum. You're basically paying out at the 1-year rookie salary, so in the $1.7 million range.
Okay.
So that's one option. So 3-year deal. The last year would be a team option. It's at the minimum, but you're basically getting 1 tier higher on the minimum than you're supposed to, based on the rules. There's another version, which is the 4-year contract, which is a team option on the 4th year. So 3 years plus a team option.
Mm-hmm.
And that salary can start as high as the 2-year YOS. And it actually pays the 2-year YOS, years of service minimum, for 2 straight years. So basically you're getting, instead of the rookie minimum or the 1-year minimum, which is the 3-year version, you're getting a 2-year minimum. And then the next year, instead of getting the 1-year minimum, you are now getting the 2-year minimum again. I'd have to look and see the second year in years 2 and 3. I think it's normal. Yeah, I think it scales back to normal in the 3-year version. So you're paid one YOS, 1 YOS, 2 YOS in a 3-year deal, each year. This one, you're paid 2 YOS, 2 YOS, 3 YOS, 4 YOS. YOS is years of service. I mean, that being the minimum. So I hope that makes sense if I said it clearly enough.
Yeah. So
if it's confusing, let me know.
The 4-year deal it'd be a 3-year deal with, it'd be a 3-year deal, a 2-year deal with 2,
one team option.
With
on
one
the
team
4th
option.
year.
Okay, the team option. Okay.
Year.
And what was the starting salary on that?
So it'd be the 2 YOS minimum, which projects to be in the neighborhood of 2 million, just under.
Okay.
So,
but with the potential to go up from there. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's based on whatever his salary or whoever signs with these exceptions, their salary is essentially a scale.
Okay.
So if we were to look right now at the rookie, like a normal rookie minimum right now on a $134 million cap projects to be 1.1. If you're a second, you've had 1 year of experience.
Yep.
So you're no longer rookie. That should be 1.77. And then if you have 2 years, 2 YOS, 2 years of experience, now you're at 1.989. So I'm rounding it up to 2 million.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and then the next year, the 2 YOS should be about 2.1. It's 2.089 in my projection at 5% increase. So 2.1. So you're making like $4.1 million theoretically in the first 2 years of a 4-year deal.
Okay.
Is that enough? I have no, I don't know the negotiation.
Totally.
If it's not enough, you're limited in this. It can only be these minimums. They're just higher minimums. So you're if you're a player, there's a benefit. But otherwise, if it could be like the biannual, it could be part of the mid-level, it could be the whole mid-level, it could be part of the room mid-level or whatever. There are different ways that they could go about it, for sure.
Okay. Cool. I think the one other big change that's going to come into play is with the potential for Sabonis to get an extension. Now, look, I don't expect Sabonis to get an extension this summer because he's going to make a lot more money next summer if he just holds out and hopefully he doesn't get injured and all that stuff, and then he becomes a true free agent. But the new CBA, it bumped the maximum salary from the maximum for an extension from 120% of your current salary to 140% of your current salary. So what are we looking at with Sabonis? He did get 2 of his bonuses kicked in, so his salary jumped to $22 million for this summer, where it was like I think 19.4, but he had a bonus for making all league and a bonus for making the all-star team, right? So
I have him at 21-1 is the number I have, but I can double check that.
Okay. Yeah. I've heard it's a little higher than that, but maybe I'm wrong. But what can they do? And can they do what we saw last year with Miles Turner, where they gave him more money this year? So we talked about the Kings having cap space this summer. Could they give him some of that cap space this summer and then play his contract extension off of that money?
Well, he is technically renegotiation eligible as of July 6th.
Okay.
The challenge is like how much of a raise is the right number. Let's say that you want to pay him the max. Well, he's got 7 years of service, so the max is, hold on, let's jump up. The max is going to be roughly 40 million, 40.2. We'll call it 40. Are you spending all your cap space functionally or most of it and losing Harrison Barnes in the process and then spending 7.6 on what's left? To me, that feels like no. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm with you. But if you were to give, if you're not talking max money, but you are talking a substantial raise, and you were to give him, say, let's just put a salary at 25 million or 26 million, so you can do a bump, right, where you're not giving him in an extend and trade. Well, a raise and extend, you could actually give him like a few million and then use the 140% next summer, right?
I'm just double checking. I think you're right. I think it might be 22. I'm going to double check that. I think you might be right. I think it might be 22.
Okay.
You could not like, so I don't really like this rule. Let's just start with that. Yeah, I need to double check that. But the main issue is, like, you can pay somebody on July 6th a certain number next year, right? On June 30th, you can't pay him that same number. Like, let's say that both sides want to re-sign for the max or whatever.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter the number, anywhere from what he's making now up to the max. But there's some number above 140% that he wants to sign for, that the Kings want to pay him, and they would do it immediately, but they can't. And then let's say he gets to free agency and some other team is like offering something more than he expected. Or maybe it's, make up something, like his father played for Portland and he gets to play where his father played. And that has a sentimental value that he didn't expect because he didn't think they were going to pay him and he was just going to stay with the Kings. But, that happened. I'm just making
Carlos Boozer situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it happened with Gordon Hayward in Utah. Like, they wanted, he would have taken an extension. He then left to Boston because they couldn't pay him the amount because the rules were limited to 120%. So let's raise it up to 140%. Like, why? I mean, okay, but like, what did we accomplish?
Yeah.
Like, that might work for some players. Absolutely. Some players, totally. But important players, by important, if you want to say, if you're going to equate worthiness of this amount of money, star players, all-stars, guys who are centerpieces of playoff teams, and you want to pay them the max, why can't you? Because there's the rookie scale, like a player for De'Aaron when he finishes his or was near the end of his first contract as a rookie, as a first-round pick, he was able to sign a max extension, right? Mm-hmm. You can't sign a max extension unless you're getting one of those like super max type deals or you're a rookie scale. And so the paperwork for Fox might have said max, probably said 25 to 30% max. I think he had a potential to go higher. It didn't actually trigger, or maybe it did. I have to check. I don't want to speak out of turn.
He made All
Um,
NBA. I think part of
yeah,
it,
I think it might have triggered. I think
but
he's one of the few
13.
who might have triggered. Yeah. So that you can't do that. I understand why the NBA would be against that. Because I think owners don't want players to have that kind of ability to get max, because then there's an obligation from the teams to kind of pay max,
Mhm.
and there's a pressure to pay max. So from a point of view, it's more the NBA would rather the flight risk than an obligation to pay guys max salaries out of turn, because they don't, like a player might be like, well, if you don't give me the max extension, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
And now they could say that as a free agent. Fine. I think the NBA is like, fine, say that as a free agent. Maybe there's no market, maybe there's no max. It's hard to find a team that has the cap space to pay you max. So I think they improved the rule, but I think it was more like lipstick on a pig improvement than
Yeah.
actually solving it. But and I think it hits DeJounte Murray and the Hawks. I think it hurts the Kings and Sabonis, because it just takes away clarity. Like, you would pay him, if you're the Kings, X dollars right now, and he would accept X dollars right now. And you
Mhm.
would know over the next course of years that he is under contract, and you can continue to build around that logic. You have Fox for 3 years, you have Sabonis for more than 2 more, but let's say you have him for those 3 years.
Mhm.
You know, at a minimum, that your team could be the Fox Sabonis show for 3 years. Now you can make the moves that correspond to improving upon what you've already done. And that
Yeah.
doesn't exist. So if you were to if you were to give him a renegotiation and extension, maybe you don't have to go all the way up, because as you mentioned, you can go up enough where 140% takes him to the max for the next year, or whatever that number is. Let's say it's not the max, but it's 35 million or
Yeah.
38 million,
Yeah.
so you raise him to that. But again, like, if you go by Harrison Barnes, his cap hold is too high, so you have to sign him first.
Yep.
Okay, so let's say that you re-sign Harrison Barnes, and I've already sort of messed with our projections here, but let's put in Rashawn Holmes back. I've already stretched him, so we're going to unstretch Rashawn Holmes. We're taking that off, right? I'm at about where we were. I've got Lyles cap hold, so I have it at 21-1. So let's say that you are the Kings and you re-sign as your 11th guy, because Lyles is your 10th unsigned, and you re-sign him at 15 million. I'm making that number up. It might be 17, it might be whatever, but that's in that range. So now you have about 7.3 million. So in theory, you could renounce Terrence Davis, Alex Len, Metu, Dellavedova, and give a $7.2 million raise to Sabonis, which puts him up closer to 30, not quite. And then you give him an extension off of that. But I'd have to look at the language to make sure. But assuming that it can now be 140% in that Reno and extend, you can argue it's worthwhile to do so. I mean, it's certainly what you're sacrificing there is functionally your mid-level. Okay, so you have, after paying Harrison Barnes, 7.2 million left, plus plus the room exception of 7.6, right? So we went under the cap, right? So okay, let me make sure I'm saying it right. So you've renounced everybody. You've paid Harrison Barnes 15 million. You are under the cap by 7.3. Now you have a 7.6 room mid-level exception. Okay. Or you never go under the cap. You have done what you've done with Harrison Barnes at 15. You have the $12 million mid-level exception and the $4.5-ish million biannual. Okay. So you're at the point where you either have 7.3 million in cap space to pay Sabonis and a 7.6 room exception, or you have a 12.2 no Reno for Sabonis and a 4.5. So you can argue that the difference in cap room, I mean, it's an argument that I hadn't considered, and it's certainly one that you can make. and it's, if
Yeah.
you can in the process also stretch Holmes or trade Holmes, I would like, if you're the Kings, for that money to go towards an improvement, but at the same time, the security of locking in Sabonis long term is
Might
important
be
too.
worth it. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know what the front office is thinking, as far as, I don't know if they've walked this path. In the world I live in, I walk every path, and if I haven't found a path, shame on me, like, that's my job. But at the same time, I can't think of everything, and that's why I collaborate with a lot of people, and it's why I don't recommend a front office with one person. It's like, you should
Yeah.
have people that you argue with and people who push you, and all in the name of the same goal, not like, abusive. I'm saying,
Yeah.
pushing each other and challenging each other. So it's a pathway that exists. It's not, it doesn't have to be Barnes. It could be another $15 million player in free agency. I just
Hmm.
use Barnes as an example. Uh, and it doesn't have to be 15. It could be 12. Like, if the competition is 12-2 for the mid-level, maybe it's 13 for someone else, or 13 or 14 for Barnes, and you're telling
Yeah.
Barnes, and again, like, Barnes would probably want more. Everyone wants more, for the most part, but maybe you give him an extra year, longer than what he expected, and maybe that extra year is only 2 million or 3 million guaranteed. So if he's making 3 or 4 or 5 million less over what he had hoped, you give him an extra year, and then that extra money is at the back end. He can be cut, and similar to what they've done with Chris Paul and the
Yeah.
Suns, which theoretically we'll see how that plays out, but he's got 16ish million guaranteed, and if they cut him and stretch him, they get flexibility, he gets money, and he gets to go play for someone else. There are some things like set off and things that could impact the money, but they could even write in waiving set off. So, without getting too deeper, we've already kind of gone into the weeds. Going any deeper into it, it's really a question of, one, creativity.
Yep.
It's a question of priorities. It's a question of decision making. It's a question of the participation of the players that you're talking about, whether it's Sabonis, whether it's Harrison Barnes, or whoever else you're chasing. And then it's the
Hmm.
and any mid-level / room mid-level, biannual, non-taxpayer mid-level exception, 7.3 million, 7 points, whatever combinations you come up with, who's taken what. And then there's the negotiations with other teams and what they're offering, which changes the equation. And that gets harder. It's easy to look at the numbers and say, okay, if we keep all these players and we plug in these players, what can you do? But it's a lot harder when you change if you take, the only quote expendable player appears to be Rashawn Holmes, but maybe not. Maybe there are other guys. I don't know where they are on Kessler Edwards. Maybe Davion Mitchell or Keegan Murray is worth going out if you're taking back an MVP caliber player. You know what I mean? Like, okay, well, fine. You're not getting Jokic. What about any of the last 20, 30 All-Stars? Okay, well, okay, what if you're not getting them? What about guys who are first team whatever but didn't make All-Star? There's a line where it's worth giving up, as it was to get Sabonis. It was, you gave up Halliburton. So
Of course.
these are, I don't have an answer for what they will do, but I think we mapped out a couple extra pathways that maybe weren't there before, or at least if they were there, maybe you've gone over them. I haven't gone over it, as
Yeah.
far as,
Yeah.
like, maybe Reno of Sabonis, and there are ways of marginally but significantly improving the team and keeping Harrison Barnes.
Hmm. Okay.
Maybe.
Interesting. Okay, I don't get to keep you all day. You've got an appointment coming up. I want to ask you one last question, and we'll end with that. Let's say the Kings do something crazy. We are hearing rumors right now that they're interested in OG Anunoby. And OG Anunoby is, to be honest with you, he's in a very similar situation to Domantas Sabonis as far as salary, in that he had signed an undervalued contract for a second contract, and he's about to come up. His third contract, if you can do an extension, he's got a player option for next year at 19.9 million, I believe, which everyone assumes he'll opt out of. But if you go do if you trade for a player like OG, and you got a deal done. Is there a way to negotiate an extension before they actually get traded, or do you have to wait until he's a Sacramento King and that's when the extension would happen?
Well, you run into two issues. One is a 140% extension enough on its
Mm-hmm.
face? If no, then never mind, right?
Yep.
But the challenge is if you actually extend and trade, which is a simultaneous transaction where you're basically amending his contract and trading him. I mean, it can be done separately, but it's treated as a singular event.
Okay.
Then the most he can get is a 5% raise. Now that I believe changes in the future, but it doesn't change in the relevant future. Our
Okay.
situation. So you have a 6-month wait before he could get more than 5%, and so and only 2 additional years. So let's say he opted out and was. I mean, at that point, it's not even worth opting out. I think he's getting more than 5% in 24, 25. So then it would be just adding on one more year at 5%
Mm,
raise, which would be a no, at least in my opinion, on what Anunoby would be willing to do. Given market value seems to be higher than that, I would say he wouldn't be willing to do it. You never know. I mean, people do make decisions that are perplexing sometimes
of course.
based on common history and common sense in history, although common sense isn't very common. The 140% we can debate. That would raise him up if he opted out to 26. So he'd go from 19 to 26. If he opted in, the next year it would be 28. But it would be better to opt out because you're getting 26 instead of 19, 20, almost 20.
Yeah.
So
So that would be
does he,
debatable because we're looking at a 4-year, 110, $112 million extension, something like that.
right, he could add four additional years on after waiting 6 months
Okay, but
with the
they
Kings.
they would have to wait 6 months to do it.
Yeah. You can extend someone for up to 5 years. You count the first year or
The
whatever
year of.
years
Mhm.
exist already on the. If there's 2 years left on the contract, you can add 3 so that the new contract is 5 years. So
Okay.
people say, like, oh, he signed a 5-year extension, and really it's a 4-year. Well, sorry. They'll say it's a 4-year extension. Really, it's a 5-year extension because you're counting the original year. But
Okay.
that's just for people like me to like quibble over. Um, you can argue it, but I, I think most people expect that an Anunoby will not extend. There's some ties to him and Masai Ujiri and Pascal Siakam that goes to their Giants of Africa and their shared heritage. That is a beautiful thing that may contribute to him staying in Toronto, despite what the rumors are. However, the Raptors have to decide what is best for them as a franchise beyond, relationships, because that's, wonderful, but it also, trades involve breaking up relationships. So I don't know the answer there. I don't think teams right now, the ones I talk to, think that OG and Siakam are available, but they've also discussed those players over the course of the last year with that team. Uh, the Raptors weren't going to trade them at the deadline, but I believe that they were at least discussed. So you could certainly say, Anunoby is another guy who can score, and he's a better defensive player than probably anyone on the team right now, except maybe Mitchell. We could debate that.
Mhm.
But, it would add to the team. And he's younger than Harrison Barnes.
Yep.
Would be a great get. As far as price, at least 2 firsts. I don't know. I don't know what the market would be, but you also have to match 18-ish million, 19 million in salary. That could go into cap room. It could be Holmes, but Holmes now you kind of have to pay for Holmes to go away. And you start to get into the issue of like, well, what do who in that core are you giving up? If you are giving up anyone, sign in trades, people say, oh, we'll just sign and trade Terrence Davis. And it's like, well,
That doesn't really
sign
work.
and
Yeah.
trades are rare. You know what I mean? It's like they happen. Colin Sexton signed and traded last year, but he was the only one. But to say a no, like the Kings are in a flexible enough position where if the Raptors said we're moving Anunoby, they could get involved. They could be at least have a credible negotiation. They would have to give up something of value that might be more than what fans would be willing to give, but and like we said, they could renegotiate their deal with Atlanta, but again, like now you don't want to play with fire and just give up everything, and one guy gets hurt, and now you're missing the next whatever Victor Wembanyama because of a deal you made a few years back. You have to be very careful. You know, the Kings have made a huge step after, you know, years in the wilderness. So on one hand, you don't want to take a step back. On the other hand, you don't want to hold on to this step like they've won the title and now they could retire. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, it was a blip that could be the foundation for a new franchise, you know, historically based, you know, not talking about like, you know, the back in the day. We're talking post Weber, Peja, you know, all that. They have a chance to really be something longer term, but they have to make the right decisions. And sometimes the right decisions aren't even the ones you make. They're just like you made the right decision and someone got hurt, or you made the wrong decision and someone was better than you thought, or some other guy got hurt on some other team. You know, it's who knows. They took a huge risk doing Sabonis for Halliburton, and for them it paid off. But it only pays off, in my mind, if it's long-term success. One trip to the playoffs, giving up arguably the best true point guard of his generation as far as age. I don't mean like generations. I'm saying of the last 5 draft classes, he may be the best true point guard. That doesn't mean he's the best point guard, but the best true point guard, best creator for others.
Of course.
And the, you know, the Kings already have a point guard, and he's a very good point guard. He's not as much of a creator as much as a scorer who can create. And that's wonderful. You know, not what Fox has done is fantastic. So that's not a criticism. It's just people are different. Some people are tall and are 7 feet and can block shots in ways that like a 6-foot guard can't. Right. So I'm not belittling. I'm just saying there are differences. So they made a claim. They made it work. It happened. But it needs to be long-term success for it to be worth Halliburton, as great as Sabonis is. And that's where they're facing their challenges. And I think they're in a good place. But you know, we'll see how they push through it.
Yeah, these things change. They have a tendency to change quickly, and you want to be on the right end of the change, which of course they were this year, but who knows what's coming up next year and the year after and the year after that. Eric, thank you so much for joining me. This is great. Just kind of meandering through all of the complexities of some of the cap questions that are going to be facing the Kings coming up. It's good to have an expert drop by. For those of you who don't know Eric, it's at Eric Pincus, Pincus, on Twitter. You can, of course, find his work at Bleacher Report and the Sports Business Classroom. Sports Business Classroom, if you have no idea what that is, you need to look it up. It's absolutely intriguing. It's of course, Eric and guys like Larry Kuhn, who, you know, they'll teach you all of this stuff that he just ran through. But in a classroom setting where you too can be an NBA draft expert. Eric, thanks so much for joining me, man. It's great having you.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Definitely appreciate the journey. And I got to go look at like, hey, maybe the Sabonis Reno is at least an arguable point. So I'll ask around and see, hey, any possibility that they would go that way.
There we go. All right. That's going to do it for this edition of the Kings Beat podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Give us a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you very soon.